Thanks, Em. Thanks for your introduction and for your land acknowledgement. And good morning, everyone. It's great to see some familiar faces and names on this call this morning. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. Can you all see that all right? Yes, just need to press play, I think. Okay. So Em's already introduced me, so I won't get into that anymore. I just have a few minutes this morning, which is really hard for me because I could talk about intangible cultural heritage all day. I've been doing this work in Saskatchewan for the past 5 going on 6 years. And as I mentioned in my introduction, I'm a folklorist, so that's where my background in this comes from. And since then, I've worked with over 100 Saskatchewan communities in various ways in terms of intangible cultural heritage. I'm not sure on the call today how familiar you are all with the concept of ICH, as we call it. So I'm just going to give you a brief kind of rundown of what it is. So the definition I'm working from comes from the UNESCO Convention on the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage, which is kind of the foundational document that did define what this is, which is something that certainly existed before UNESCO defined it. It's something intangible cultural heritage. It lives in communities, it lives in individuals, it lives in families, kind of whether we're aware of it or not. It's working itself through our daily lives. But UNESCO, a team of experts about 20 years ago now recognized that there was a lot of guidelines and conventions and protocols in place for protecting built heritage, natural heritage, but there was this whole other body of intangible cultural heritage, which didn't have any protections or even legal status or anything of the sort. And so that's why this convention came about in 2003. Canada to date is not a signatory of it, one of the very few countries in the world who's not. And yet there's several organizations in the country and the province who are working with intangible cultural heritage. And over the past few years, we've definitely seen that ICH is becoming much more commonly understood. People know what it is when we mention it. So sometimes though, the actual definition, which can be a little boring, can get I think it's important to still define exactly, or not exactly what it is, because that's sort of the whole point of ICH, is that it's not an exact science. It's fluid, it's dynamic, and it's defined in many cases, it should be defined by the communities themselves. Communities themselves should be deciding what is their intangible cultural heritage. I just want to make the point that it's, in terms of in a museum context, ICH is more than just say the story behind an artifact. That, oh, this is, this mug was created in 1904 and it was donated to the museum by this person and it was used for this purpose. I mean, that's sort of provenance, that's a story behind the mug. But intangible cultural heritage would more be, how was this mug made? What kind of knowledge went into actually crafting this mug? And for perhaps using it throughout time. So it does go beyond story into the deeper actual knowledges that we inherit from past generations and that we learn from each other. So in a natural course of things, ICH is a very fluid force that moves from person to person, from community to community, and it does pass down through generations and also moves laterally. And so in the UNESCO Convention, to try and sort of take this huge wealth of information and knowledge that exists in the world and in communities and make it a little bit more sort of easier to sort of, brainstorm or break down into categories. They've created these 5 domains, which are oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, rituals, and festive events, and knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, and the knowledge and skills to produce traditional crafts. And they go on further to emphasize that ICH is traditional, contemporary, and living at the same time. It's inclusive, it's representative, and very importantly, it's community-based. So at Heritage Saskatchewan, we also use the term living heritage, which goes kind of beyond both ICH and tangible heritage, and recognizes that heritage, like culture itself, is a dynamic force that evolves and adapts to shifting circumstances. So as the world around us changes, so too does our interpretation of heritage. So those of us who work in the heritage field, and however that in various ways, whether it is with museums or it's with archives or we're out in community doing grassroots work, or we're doing events, or we're historians creating a new documentary record, our own living heritage informs our worldviews and contributes to our sense of identity as individuals and as communities. So the more that we're aware of this force kind of working on us as individuals and as communities, I think we're better able to confront pressing contemporary challenges, and also to pull out that wealth of intangible cultural heritage that is living in all of our communities, that's just kind of waiting for us to sort of unearth it and bring it out. And in terms of how, so we can define this, we can start to explore it in our community. That's a lot of the work I do with Heritage Saskatchewan, is helping communities sort of unearth that intangible cultural heritage that's lying sort of maybe not dormant, but it's in the community, it's already there. How do we sort of bring it out and recognize it? And so there's various ways you can do that, just simple brainstorming and asking some questions like I've listed here, like for example, what's our community's origin story? And I'll leave that with you to just contemplate that. What is your origin story? Also, what do our local place names tell us about our living heritage? Often place names are a really good place to start, to delve into intangible cultural heritage and living heritage, and to unearth the many layers of different cultural groups that have lived in a place over time. And often sometimes there can be a little bit of, it's not clear what the exact place name origin is, and that in itself is something to explore as well, is recognizing that there isn't one particular story or one definitive definition. Who are the tradition bearers in your community? What traditions does your community most dearly value? What knowledge is about living in the local environment of your community is perhaps at risk of being lost? These are kinds of questions that your community, your museum, your organization can start to delve into to really unearth that. And if you have more questions about more specific ways to do that, of course, get in touch with us or with MASS, and we can certainly provide resources to help with that process. And finally, my last point I want to make before I turn it over to Wendy is another part of the UNESCO convention that we work with at Heritage Saskatchewan is once you've kind of started to really unearth that ICH and get a grasp of it and get excited by it, because that's the one thing I love about doing this work in communities. It's fun. People get excited about it. It's fun to do. Once we have that all kind of come up and it's, oh my gosh, we have so much intangible cultural heritage in our community, like what do we do with it? Well, there's 4 goals of safeguarding ICH, and these are what we at Heritage Saskatchewan kind of build our work upon. And that first goal is documentation, which communities are often already doing that. They're often doing a great job of that, but sometimes it's recognizing maybe we need to document some of this intangible cultural heritage as well. Recognition and celebration, which again, communities are often already doing things. Museums are often really great at, having events or festivals every year, and often those events and festivals already incorporate ICH. The third, and I've underlined it here because this one is sometimes the most difficult to do, but in some ways is perhaps the most important goal, if I may say that, is transmission. As I mentioned at the beginning, ICH naturally, we transmit it from one generation to the next, from one person to the next. And for thousands and thousands of years as humans have lived on this planet, we have passed down our intangible cultural heritage, our knowledges of how to do things, how to make things, our stories, our understanding of ourselves in the world, our values, our various faiths and spiritualities are passed down. But in our modern society, globalization, technology is kind of creating, and things like, a very relevant example here is residential schools, where, that was a state, run program to actually break that transmission in one sense, was to just break the transmission of cultural heritage. And so when that has been broken, it can be difficult to get it back. And it's something that is increasingly at risk in most cultures around the world. And so again, it's a tricky one, and it's not something I can go into detail here, but I just wanted to lay it out there to think about that in terms of not only documenting and celebrating heritage, but thinking about how do we pass the things that are most important to us on to the next generation. And the fourth goal that UNESCO defines is utilizing ICH for community development. And often that's already happening, and especially in museum spaces, where museums are often spaces in a community of you know, it's an open and an accessible space for people to come. And in that sense, it is already contributing to community development. And so utilizing intangible cultural heritage can be another powerful way to sort of draw in a really representative, you know, group of your community. So I don't want to go on too much further because we have 3 other great speakers. So that was just a very, very quick definition of intangible cultural heritage. And the kind of work we do at Heritage Saskatchewan is, again, helping communities sort of unearth this and then also work with it in the ways that they choose to do that. And this is a topic I could go on and on about. And if you have more questions or would like some resources, definitely get in touch with us. My email is ich@heritagesas.ca. Check out our website, our blog. We have various ICH-based projects we've done in the past and ones we're working on now. So please do check that out if you're interested. And also, I'm happy to announce that we're working on a symposium this November, early November, the 2nd and 3rd, about living heritage, and intangible cultural heritage will definitely be part of that conversation. So if you'd like a more about intangible cultural heritage, please do look out for news about our symposium, and we hope to see you there in November. So thanks again for having me this morning, and I really look forward to hearing the rest of the speakers.
Thanks so much, Kristin. And yeah, I know there's a lot more to talk about with this topic. So thank you for your introduction. So now I'd like to introduce Wendy Peart. Wendy Peart is the Curator of Education and Community Outreach at the Dunlop Art Gallery. She previously taught at the University of Regina with Learning Through the Arts. She received her BFA in Visual Art and BA in Art History at the University of Regina and an MFA at the University of Victoria. She is a working artist in the areas of sculpture, drawing, and painting, with artistic interests that consider the commodification and politicization of the natural environment. She was the recipient of the Saskatchewan Arts Award in Arts and Learning in 2016. So welcome, Wendy, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Em. Here, I'm just going to share my screen. If I can remember how to do it on, oh yes, okay. Every platform is different, right? Okay. Is it on, everybody?
Looks good, yep.
Oh, it does. Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, today what I would like to do, well, I'll tell you what I would like to do in a moment, but for those of you who don't know where Dunlop Art Gallery is, it is a unit of the Regina Public Library. So we have 2 gallery spaces with the library, and one at Central and one at Sherwood. And we have been collecting artwork for a number of years now. But the point of my short presentation today will be to cover a couple of topics in relation to intangible cultural heritage as I am perceiving it to be. It's less of a terminology that we float around at the library. We probably just have other terms that mean similar things. But I want to talk to you today about the evolution of our collections practice. I want to talk about how we use art as a catalyst for learning, discovery, and connection, and how we are currently challenging the status quo of our particular collections protocols. So basically, here's the Dunlop at Central Library, and our mandate is to engage, research, and present diverse range of visual artwork, as well as other forms of art as we are expanding our definitions constantly. So our focus is on contemporary culture, and our goal is to enhance quality of life of our public, and informing practices and understanding of visual art through activities that include exhibitions, programs, publishing, and collecting. Okay, so we have two main collections: our permanent collection and our art rental collection. So our permanent collection, we don't have a lot, as many as some other major galleries, 447 works in that collection, and the art rental is about 230 approximately. And again, the art rental program has been in existence for a long time, which is was new and cutting edge at the time when it was developed over 50 years ago. But it's, anyone with a library card can come in and for a small fee can rent a work of art for any length of time that you want. Actually, cool story is that someone rented an artwork for over 15 years, just kept coming in and paying the small fee. Yeah, so that's a cool story. So Dunlop began collecting in 1946, which was quite a while ago. So at that time, the mandate was really a strong focus on Saskatchewan artists, and also strong focus on folk art. And so you see a lot of depictions of the landscape and rural life. This artwork here by James Henderson was pretty much the first one that entered our collection in 1946. So that's kind of, we have a lot of this kind of work in our collection. Not to say that that's, not relevant. It's entirely relevant to have work depicting rural life, depicting cultural practices, and it provides a window into what that life was, that particular cultural heritage at that time. Also to say, I want to note that by far, of course, at the time, Dunlop, it was primarily white Saskatchewan male artists that were in our collection. But I really like to highlight the female artists of our collection, and that is growing in numbers. We primarily now focus a lot on female artists, and I'll explain a bit more about that later. So our collection does reveal this kind of background of people that worked as artists, and many of them, like I said, were folk artists. So that meant they were not swayed or tainted, or they had a fresh look on life, a fresh look on art. They were self-taught primarily, or learned from a very small circle of peers, as opposed to a dominant artistic tradition. So that's another really great aspect about the artwork in our collection, is that they had this very fresh point of view that was based on real life, real living on the prairies. As we move forward past those years and we enter more into the 70s, 80s, and 90s, our collecting strategy became more, we are more interested in sort of beyond those paradigms of folk art and more into contemporary artists who are working as professionals across Canada and internationally. And we also chose to collect work that would be more relevant to the people that would see them in our branches. So our permanent collection is in our public spaces all across Regina. And it's actually the coolest part of my job. Well, one of the coolest parts is to select work for certain communities, what would be relevant. I work with the librarians. What would your community really like to see? So we put these collections in our public spaces. We want them to live and breathe with the community, as opposed to sitting in a vault. And it's always my goal to get that vault as empty as possible, while protecting the integrity of the artwork. So you can see here, we've got quite a few Bill Burns work in our collection. He does some really interesting work with, and strongly related to libraries, as you can see here with books. And Diana Thorneycroft, who's challenging stereotypes about the Canadian mythology, the great Canadian myths. I also want to just talk briefly about, we do have these exhibition spaces where we approach learning, discovery, and connection through living people. So we have gallery facilitators in the gallery at Central all the time. So their job is to welcome people and to validate and respect and honor their interpretation of the art, and not to provide one story, one dominant, this is what it is, or explanation. The way our facilitators approach learning with the customers, as we call them, visitors, is to create curiosity within them and to have a conversation. So it's a two-way street, and we learn so much from that two-way street. The facilitators provide us with feedback on what customers say about the artwork. And it's one of my favorite things to do in the morning is to read those reports daily on what happened in the gallery. It is amazing what happens when you can put a person beside an artwork and have a conversation with a visitor, because the things that happen are just, you would never be able to predict. Some of the great stories that we get are someone will leave saying, I had no idea I was a feminist. And they had a whole other idea of what feminism was. But through this artwork, I think it was our Hazel Meyer exhibition that we had in the fall, someone walked out saying, I am firmly a feminist, and I know that now. So stuff like that is really contributing to our cultural fabric. We use our collections here. This is kind of a little bit confusing, but we run programs working with the public. Occasionally we get the opportunity to work with, we get to work with children whenever we want, not so much during COVID, but more now and before. So our gallery educator or our educators can use artwork that's existing in branches and create little ways for kids to create their own stories based on the artwork. So looking at an artwork and having them take little cutouts of elements of the artwork and creating their whole other narrative, which inspires this free thinking and inspires curiosity and another way of looking at art that's not based on this is what it is and this is what it says. It says to people what it says to that individual person, and that's what we want to foster. Even though artists have a point of view, and we do include those, but we also want others to have a point of view when they look at the artwork and experience it. Now I'm just going to launch into, I did talk a little bit about our past practices being primarily focused on Saskatchewan artists and mostly white male artists. But that is changing, and in my 10 years at Dunlop Art Gallery, I've seen a radical change in that practice to include a lot more intersectionality within our representation and collections. So for example, we've got this amazing Christy Belcourt work. For those of you who don't know her, she's an artist and a writer, research Indigenous artist whose focus is on medicines and the plant life and how to pass on that intangible cultural knowledge through her work, through this visual form. So that work here that's presented here is at our Albert location at the Mama Weyachton Center. It's like one of my absolute favorites. We've recently acquired the Fomohobes work, who is a collective of artists who talk about queer experience through collage work. And also, I can't believe it took until this year to acquire work from a Black artist. So this is our first acquisition of a Black artist by Liz Icarico, who exhibited at Dunlop in 2019, and we purchased 2 of her works in our collection. So this particular work is hanging up at the Connaught Branch in Regina. The Connaught Branch was a library that Liz frequented as a child, as a young person. She lived in the cathedral area of Regina. So this work has really this location has deep resonance for her. And a lot of her work looks at her past and about coming to terms with her past and her relationships with her father. As well, another thing we're doing, like we just recently purchased work from an American artist. Now, this is going way beyond our traditional mandate, focus on Saskatchewan artists, but this work has deep resonance with our community. We realized that our collections policy was incredibly colonial. If we can only show art from within, how are we going to encourage breadth and cultural connectivity? We need to include more. We need to acquire works and share those works with our public that are going to be meaningful to them. So Jeffrey Verage is an American artist, and his work was a part of When Raven Became Spider, an exhibition that toured quite extensively throughout Canada. So we have 6 of his works, and they are doing fabulously in our branches, and they are so attractive to people of all ages, to children, and beyond. So we're really proud to have his work in our collection. And also recently, this is our most recent collection of Jamie Black's of her Red Dress series. Jamie is a Winnipeg-based artist who has done a number of installations across Canada, working with communities to hang red dresses in locations to address the problem of missing and murdered Indigenous women and children. This work has deep resonance. We don't even have to talk about what the red dress symbolizes anymore. We know what it means, and we need our collections to also be addressing aspects of truth and reconciliation. We need to address political and sociological and all kinds of things that we need to build on, we need to work together around. So art can be, deeply personal. It can be fun. It can be about your own kind of inner world, but it also needs to be about the larger, broader scheme and addressing some of the things that need to be addressed in our broader communities and in our politics. Have I gone really fast? I can't tell. Okay, so we are breaking some rules here. We just recently broke a rule, and I'm really proud to be part of that. We had a request from another library in Fort Capel to borrow a work for National Indigenous History Month. So this work, a rug by Florence Ryder, who was an artist who worked with the Capel. There was a group of rug hookers, and that she was a part of that and did some work with them. So anyways, this work has come back home to Fort Capel to be part of that community. And normally we would never lend a work out beyond a gallery, with all kinds of protocols around handling and, checking off all the boxes with security and with insurance and with, all these kinds of things. But we just tried to make it as simple as possible, reduce as many barriers as possible to be able to loan this work for a month. And I guess it's been wildly enjoyed by the public. People sit there and they really enjoy having this work come home to Fort Capel. Yeah, so that's something that we're doing. Some of the things that we're considering to be able to offer more close relationships with our artwork with the community. So yeah, I'm gonna take, and does anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you.
We haven't had any questions come in yet, but also we're going to have some time at the end. So yeah, we'll see what happens then. But thank you for that. It's really interesting to see how everything's evolving at the Dunlop. So, all right. And now I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Claire Thompson. Claire is a PhD candidate at the Department of History at the University of Alberta. She completed her MA in History at the University of Saskatchewan, and she is currently working in a term historian position with Parks Canada. Claire is from the Wood Mountain area in southern Saskatchewan, where she currently resides in ranches with her family. Her dissertation also focuses on the history of the Wood Mountain Lakota community. And Claire is also the secretary of the Wood Mountain Historical Society. So Claire, I will pass it over to you now.
Thank you, Em. Thanks for that great introduction, and thank you to all the other panelists and presenters who went before me. I'll just share my screen here. Sure, I got this right. Okay. Oh, sorry, can't see it here. There we go. Okay, I think that's working. So yeah, I'm the secretary of the Wood Mountain Historical Society, and we manage and operate the Wood Mountain Rodeo Ranch Museum in southwestern Saskatchewan, as you probably know. So we're a nonprofit volunteer-run board, and one of the things we do is operate this museum. So yeah, I'll just briefly start, I guess, by situating kind of a conversation that my partner and I were having in preparation for this presentation. I was thinking, I'm new to ICH, I'm still learning about it, so I'm definitely no expert, but the lived part of it is very relevant and interesting to me, because I think we all we all participate in it, whether we, give it that term or not. So that's the part I was interested in. And so I was talking with my partner, who's a Lakota language teacher, and he was like, well, we don't, there's no real way to explain that in Lakota, I don't think. Like in cultural, intangible cultural heritage, you wouldn't call anything like that. But as we were talking more, we realized that this is present actually, and there is a fairly close term. This Icarico yake, or in fast speech, Icarico. This idea, and it's usually used in context of having something attached to something as far as a tradition or a use or a story. So it was very, I think, much in line with ICH anyways. And so I give you a couple examples here that he had given me of how you would use it in a sentence. And we kind of deducted in the end that ICH is not just in the past then, and that, of course, in museums and in galleries and such, we often focus on heritage and we put that in the past, but it is living and it has to give meaning and relevance to our collections and our work as well, which is very in line with the Lakota understanding of that kind of tradition or use or stories as well. So I thought I'd start off with that. So I'll give some more examples from the Wood Mountain Rodeo Ranch Museum as well, kind of how I think we're incorporating ICH into our work, but also I know we have a long ways to go, and I'll talk about kind of 4 main areas I think that we could expand on that and do better, as well as just what came from our roundtable discussions. This is a photograph from up on top behind the Wood Mountain Rodeo Ranch Museum. There's a little hill which has a monument to Sitting Bull. And every year there seems to be a huge variety of wildflowers and plants up on that hill. Every season has something up there. And I took this photograph a few years ago in August, and you can see the vetch especially. And so we really, especially in our school tours in June, like to take students up there and kind of connect them to the plants and to the place, which I think is very much about moving on that knowledge and that and the uses of the place and those plants, which is, I think, in line with ICH. We could do better, though, I think, also of capturing some of that knowledge and making sure it's recorded and shared in a more kind of diverse and permanent way. Because right now it just lives within whoever's interpreting that day, especially board members. And there's no real, other than, those, which is great. This is a good way to pass on that knowledge, that person-to-person relationship, but also it is kind of fleeting because that knowledge can be lost fairly easily. So that's something I think we need to address as well. Another thing that we often do with the students, sorry, this picture's a little bit blurry, is we have an Adobe that sits outside, and we get the students especially to mud it, and we're going to hopefully have a, a community Adobe mudding day this year, because as you can see, the students only reach up so far usually in our Adobe, and we need to get the whole thing done. But the knowledge of how to make that mud, we make it with them. We have all the supplies there, and they get to get their hands dirty and in there. And then we actually get to kind of live the built heritage that's on the museum property as well. So they get to participate in interacting and connecting with the Adobe itself and with making the mud. And of course, it's lots of fun for kids as well. I find at the Rodeo Ranch Museum, just in general, that we're better with connecting, for some reason, activities and ICH with children. Maybe it's because we think we need to engage them on that level, which is great, and I agree we do, but we also need to, I think, have more engagement with hands-on learning with adults as well. So that's one example. Here's another, and here's our beautiful Kristin. She was giving a film screening of her current film at this time. This is a few years ago, and she also brought more films from NFB that especially one in particular that was filmed about Wood Mountain history, and that a lot of local people hadn't seen in many, many years. And so that was that accessibility of having access to like NFB collections that most community members maybe would not have was really important and exciting for a lot of people in the Wood Mountain area. And we had a pretty good turnout for that as well. It was a beautiful evening. And that helped give some relevance then to what the community gets from the museum, as well as when we're viewing the things, the objects, of having that context and those stories that were in that film, or even just the community participation. Lots of people recognized people in those, excuse me, in those films, and that was really important as well. So that community engagement and connection that was already recorded in a film but wasn't accessible. And of course, accessibility, that's something I'll touch on later on in one of my points, is something that we also need to work on a little bit more to connect people with ICH as well as with the objects and collections. Every year we try to have a jingle or just any powwow kind of dancers come, especially this is Catherine. Her mother Lita is on our board, and they usually come and do jingle dress and fancy shawl dances for us at the museum. Of course, they also teach some of the steps and explain the regalia and connect it to things that are in the collection as well, which is really important for connecting the Lakota community in with the museum, of course, which we display some of those artifacts and stories as well. And this is important, especially for us and for Indigenous people at the museum, is that often museums and just, I guess, scholarship in general puts Indigenous people in the past, but it doesn't make them participate. It doesn't allow for participation and the lived connections to continue. And of course, these aren't antiquated, archaic stories or people. These are very much lived traditions with continuing realities. And so having that connection between the collections, the place, and the people is very important. And Catherine and Lita are really integral to that. And then I think this is my final example, is we had, for example, Casey and Clayton, a couple local artists, and also Casey's other band, the Waverly Pickers. And we've often in the past have had a lot of participation as far as musicians from the local area, because that's something that's quite embedded in the Wood Mountain area, and something also that we kind of display at the museum, but not maybe explain a whole lot of. And so having the distinct style, especially of some of this music type, is really important, and to have people connect to it is not just like a way to engage people and have people visit the museum, but also to explain some of those songs and the history and relevance to the traditions, especially since, for example, these ladies, their grandparents, for example, a lot of them, including my own, were some of the founding board members of the museum, and their family histories are part of the stories that we tell. And so having that lived connection with more than one generation is also really important for transmission of ICH. Check my time here, make sure I'm not going too over. Oh, this is my last example. At Wood Mountain Historical Society and the museum, we are better at doing the written kind of transmission stuff. We're not so good anymore about maybe the hands-on, which like a few other presenters were discussing, is what we need as far as the lived traditions and knowledge transmission that we need to do. But there are, for example, the Legends of Our Times exhibit, which had a publication through the Museum of Civilization, which was called at the time. So the publication is really good at connecting kind of the historical context and traditions that you can see to the objects in our museum. They donated the exhibit to us after, which was very generous, as well as some of our other publications like the Wood Mountain Uplands. And that helps, I think, to transmit some of the stories as well as the context to the collections and the relevance of the museum, as well as the objects. So these are just some of the kind of 4 main points that I took away from our roundtable, as well as what I think our own museum at Wood Mountain could do better, and that we're trying to address, especially in the collaboration in caring for the objects and connecting them with the families and the communities they came from. And addressing then how the museum can be more reflective of the community that we serve, and those that are especially underrepresented, as other presenters have said. And so in doing that, we also need to collaborate then to communicate the knowledge and meaning of their objects and their collections. And like I said, not just through written interpretation, but many different mediums and avenues. especially different hands-on learning and workshops and activities, which I think we could do better at. I remember, for example, when I was a kid in the museum, they had just always a wool saddle pad that you could contribute to by hooking that was always out when you first came in, and everybody kind of had a chance to learn how to do it if you wanted to. And then we would keep those for on display or to give away to different volunteers and such. So things like that, I think, and for me now, I would have a hard time remembering how to do that. So I think it's, we have to keep up with these things and with those knowledge keepers as well. And then I said also guest storytellers and speakers and film. I also think our museum and just in general that we need to address ICH right from the beginning of when something comes to us in our collections. And we need to be better at keeping records and passing on that story and knowledge and how that can happen. And that's really, I see holes sometimes in explaining the object's value and relevance and why it's here. And I think that has a lot to do with ICH and addressing those gaps in record keeping as well. And then lastly, I just said increasing the accessibility to collections, and so that more people can engage and make those connections. We often think that we are like the gatekeepers to knowledge, but it's often reciprocal. I mean, we learn just as much from people who might walk in off the street and know something about an object because it resided in their family or community, or they had something similar. And we need to do better at learning from people in community and families, as well as giving opportunities so people can engage in that way. And I know a lot that came up in our roundtable was digitization, for example, and I think that's just one avenue that especially the Wood Mountain Rodeo Ranch Museum needs to kind of get up to speed with, but in general. So I think that's all I have to say for now, but I welcome any questions and I'm excited to hear from more of you. Thank you all.
Awesome, thanks, Claire. Just checking the chat here quickly. So we did have a question from Kevin Kitchen, and maybe he's interested in hearing from the presenters on ethical questions of institutions and museums collecting intangible cultural heritage. And I know Kristin has to jet away from us right at 11, but maybe that's something we can chat about after our last presenter, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, great. So yeah, I'd like to welcome our next presenter for the day, our last presenter of the morning, and that is Joey Donnelly. And Joey is a folklorist, a freelance journalist, and cultural consultant. He was raised on a farm near Herbert, Saskatchewan, and graduated with an MA in folklore at Memorial University of Newfoundland. And so, Joey, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thanks so much, Dan, the MAS staff and members, and also Claire, Kristin, and Wendy. Thank you so much for your excellent presentations. I learned a lot. Yeah, I'll just start sharing my screen and get started. Okay. Okay. I know it kind of looks like I'm from an I Love Lucy episode, but we'll just rock it and go with it. Just a moment, please. Okay, so this presentation is discussing places of memory, places in our community that hold special meaning. You know, it can be a positive, but it could also be a negative thing. And if you'll indulge me, this will be kind of a part oral history narrative of my life and how I've encountered some significant spaces. So just to begin, l'œuvre de mémoire is any significant entity, whether material or non-material in nature, which by dint of human will or the work of time has become a symbolic element of the memorial heritage of any community. This term was coined by Pierre Nora, a historian in France, and it really applies to what we'll be discussing today. So inspirations from the past, when you think about your own life, what are the icons that kind of make up your story of yourself? For myself, it is my family farm. My great grandfather in the early 20th century died from a farming accident in Wisconsin. He was gored by a boar, and then so my great grandmother built this house and brought most of her kids to Saskatchewan, and that's how my journey started, with a pig. And so from my childhood, I had some icons, and one of them was the Statue of Liberty. She was this amazing monument that, of course, is iconic. But one of the things I learned recently about the Statue of Liberty is that the original design, instead of the torch and the placard, she was breaking chains. And over time, that design was let go because people were kind of uncomfortable discussing the end of slavery. So this new monument was constructed. But the shackles on the Statue of Liberty are still visible, but that's by helicopter, and it's underneath her robe. So it kind of speaks to perhaps how monuments are a little leery of addressing some of the more uncomfortable truths of our history. Of course, family lore plays a big part in our identity. And for myself, this is St. Patrick's Church, built in 1912. And in 1996, my aunt, who was a theater critic at the Gazette, Patricia Donnelly, she bought this church in 1996 for $1,000. And that came with everything: the altar from Paris, the priest vestments, the confessional was turned into a broom closet. But my aunt noticed that there was one thing that was missing, and that was the bishop's chair. And she called up the bishop, and he admitted that yes, he had the chair. And so I'll never forget the mission going to Gravelberg to collect this missing chair, and my aunt kind of giddy down the highway as we departed with this beautiful artifact. So every summer, just during the rodeo weekend in Herbert, my aunt, she puts on concerts. They could be poetry readings or short plays, but it's a different way for the folks in Herbert to gather. And so she's kind of, recreated this church. And yeah, she's quite the character. So when it comes to lore, city lore, especially the spaces that we inhabit really play a crucial role in how we identify ourselves and our communities. And these can be coffee shops, flag courts, your monuments. But there are certain monuments that require some activism. I would argue that we have to find the conditions to protect these venues of living heritage, because they can provide the space for all of this intangible cultural heritage that we're discussing. So Steve Zeitlin is one of the persons who really advocates this approach to folklore. He developed city lore out of New York City and run programs like Space Matters. And they use poetry, cultural presentations, art, oral history narrative to actively protect spaces and ensure that stories of marginalized communities are also remembered. So as a young man in my 20s, I became obsessed with the lyric theater. Like in the early 2003, it was a bar called the Inferno. But after digging into the history, I found this one article that said that the opening show of the Lyric Theater in 1912 had a cast of 75 players, and it was a musical called The Red Rose. And I was amazed that there was this richness to cultural life that frankly just did not exist at that time. So through the help of folks like Hugh Henry at the Museum of Swift Current, Kim O'Telling, Paul Rozanzoff, Shan Gowan, and Simon and Leah Nekonechny, and a whole bunch of people, we formed a nonprofit organization called the Southwest Cultural Development Group. And we were able to acquire the building, and through fundraisers and a vaudeville revisited program starring Fred Penner, we kind of relaunched the Lyric Theater and resuscitated the memory that was lost. But what we discovered, that every single generation in our community remembered the Lyric, whether it was as a theater a cinema house or a bar, everyone had great memories. So that's what we latched onto. And now it's an icon of Swift Current. The SCDG is still running, and it's run by artistic director Gordon McCall. And there's a Shakespeare festival this summer, so be sure to check it out. So yeah, in my journeys across Canada, I lived in Montreal and in St. John's, and in Montreal, I discovered the neighborhood of Griffintown. And this was a revelatory experience for me because I didn't really understand the depths of my Irish heritage. I didn't even know anything about the Irish language, but Griffintown provided an entry point to get beyond the superficial parades and shamrocks and such. And through Michael Keneally at the Irish Canadian Studies Program, it was a great experience in just kind of, broadening that sense of space or identity through space. And it was, as another kind of personal experience. As a gay man, I was coming out. We formed Queer Concordia as a service organization. It used to be a club. And we did that also through just the storytelling, like the 1976-77 Trucks raids. It was Montreal's oldest gay bar that was still in existence when I was in Montreal. And just sharing those stories really built a sense of community around the Concordia neighborhood where this bar existed. And St. John's, of course, that's where I met Kristin, and we have similar interests. She studied barns, and I studied this particular farm. It's the O'Brien farm, and Aloysius O'Brien, he was an Irish language scholar, farmer, an all-around great guy. He collected dialect words, Irish language words, and before he died, he wanted to ensure that his farm was turned into an open air museum for the interpretation of Newfoundland Irish culture, Irish language, and agriculture. And now one of the most active programs is actually a daycare that's running land-based education programs. And so as the prodigal son returned, I ended up buying a Eaton home. And this is a 1918 home too that came with a lot of stories, and it just holds personal significance for me. It was set up on the old country school site where my dad went to school. And so, in my private life, I love old buildings and the stories they tell, and, where they can go from here. And moving along for the last 5 years, I worked at the Southwest Newcomer Welcome Center, and the current exhibit at the Swift Current Museum is called Newcomers Then and Now, and it features stories of newcomers all through Swift Current's history. And more recently, this past fall, I worked with a local photographer. She captured these beautiful pictures of the new families in Swift Current. And then I interviewed them afterwards and asked them questions about their journey to Canada, how they were dealing with COVID, and even their cultural traditions that they were still practicing. And this ties into another program that we got through the Multicultural Initiatives Fund at Sask Culture called Welcome Center Studios. And that's also to uplift, stories from newcomers and folks who are new to the community. And another project that I'm currently working on is Billy Buffalo. He was a play structure created by Russ Uristi, and I'd love to chat with you, Wendy, later about Russ, because I've been in touch with him for the last month or so, and we're talking about building a third Billy the Buffalo. So if you didn't know, Swift Current had a giant buffalo with a slide coming down his head, and it was a near and dear creation for kids and families. And unfortunately, the first Billy was burnt down like 3 months after it was created. And but we're working towards building another Billy. So just working with lore and people like that, trying to tell stories of the buffalo. And there's the Buffalo People Arts Institute. We're hoping to work with them, and there's a Buffalo Day coming up in Regina, so be sure to check that out. just concluding, just a message about reclaiming, spaces of memory. Here's a good friend, Star Andreas, who is, who worked actively to take down the John A. Macdonald statue. And she says that she's not destroying history. She just wanted it relocated into another space. So Swift Current 2 is dealing with its own monument troubles with the Rainbow Crosswalk. And so just, just the dynamics between that is happening. And then, yeah, looking beyond Highway 4, I've been talking with Star and thinking that it's time to rename it Big Bear Trail. There was a campaign in 2004 to do that, and I'm hoping to reach out with folks so we can collaborate and make that happen. So there you go. That's my presentation. Thanks so much for listening. And if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them. So that is it.
Awesome. Thanks, Joey. That Billy Buffalo project sounds really interesting. I remember studying a bit about Russell City and things when I was in university and doing some work at the Mackenzie Art Gallery. So it's neat to hear. I didn't even know about that. That's really cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. I'm happy to open it up for questions and comments. I know we're right at 11 o'clock here, which is usually when we wrap it up. But if you have any questions or want to have a bit of a discussion, please feel free to jump in, raise your hand, put your question in the chat. I know Aileen from Prairie Central District sounds like she wants to connect with you, Joey, on the Buffalo project, so that's cool.
Yeah, we have Russell. There's a really big arts community in the Silton and kind of Lumsden area, and we've got some great architectural pieces here. And yeah, I would love to host something. That's on my Silton hat, but through Prairie Central we could probably swing something. We've some crazy cool buildings, and our elephant got tore down, I think in the early 90s maybe. And then they've resurrected this massive thing, but we actually just paid $16,000 for a play imp elephant, and it was like a big campaign we had in town to bring back the elephant and bring back play. And yeah, but I've got your email, so Joseph, I'm going to connect with you because
wonderful. Russell's
a hard man to touch base with, so kudos to you for getting him.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great. And look, we now have Grasslands National Park just south of us on Highway 4. So yeah, it'd be nice to say from Billy Buffalo Park, take the Big Bear Trail down to Grasslands and see some real buffalo. And so yeah, I think these are images and symbols that can really bind the community because they're not really controversial, but they can be reimagined, right? So thank you, Eileen.
Awesome. Well, thanks to everyone who joined us this morning, and thank you so much to all of our presenters. I know Kristin already had to step away, but thanks to Kristin, Claire, Joey, Wendy. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for your time and involvement in the roundtables and this presentation. And again, I'll just kind of echo what Kristin said in the chat there, that to save the dates for November 2nd and 3rd for the kind of bit more, a bit more extended involved symposium that we're going to host in partnership with Heritage Saskatchewan on living heritage. I hope to see everyone there. It's going to be a really fantastic couple of days worth of discussion. Well, not a couple of days, it'll be a few hours. We're going to spread it out. It's going to be virtual, so we know people's limitations on that. But I just wanted to close by saying that for July and August, we are moving to a once a month format for the community chats. So the next one is going to be happening on July 21st at 10 o'clock. And then the August chat will be August 18th. I'm still kind of finalizing some details on who the presenters will be for those chats. But yeah, just they're not going to be bi-weekly over the summer. Hopefully, we know folks want to be outside and taking holidays and all that good stuff. So we just thought we'd bump it down for those months. But please do mark those dates. We hope to see you again. And yeah, have a great summer, everyone, and we'll see you in July.